Ezra Mitchell's weathered hand froze on the courtroom door handle, his heart hammering against his ribs as he stared at the steel cage in the center of the federal courthouse. Inside, Luna, his Luna, paced with the fluid grace of something wild, something dangerous, something that could tear a man apart in seconds. The DNA results lay sealed on Judge Thompson's bench like a death sentence waiting to be read. They called her a monster. He called her his daughter. The bailiff's keys clattered to the marble floor as Luna's yellow eyes locked onto Ezra's through the bars, her massive 127-pound frame tensing with recognition. A woman in the gallery gasped audibly, pressing her hand to her mouth. The court reporter's fingers trembled above her keyboard. 3 years ago, Ezra thought he'd saved a dying puppy from a December snowstorm. Today, federal prosecutors would prove that the creature he'd raised with bottle feedings and bedtime stories was a pure-blooded wolf, a predator capable of crushing his skull with a single bite. "All rise," the bailiff commanded, his voice cracking with nervous energy. What had Ezra been living with all this time? And would Luna survive the next 72 hours? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The memory of that December night 3 years ago still haunted Ezra's dreams. He'd been driving home from the grocery store in Cedar Ridge, Oregon, his ancient pickup truck struggling through the worst snowstorm the Cascade foothills had seen in decades. At 65, retirement had been harder than 35 years of fighting fires. The silence in his cabin was deafening without Sarah's laughter echoing through the rooms. Sarah had lost her battle with cancer 4 years earlier, taking with her the warmth that had made their modest home feel like a sanctuary. Their son Jake had moved to California for work, calling maybe once a month with hurried conversations about his tech job and promises to visit that never materialized. The $1,200 monthly pension barely covered utilities and groceries, leaving Ezra to count every dollar while counting down empty days. That night, his headlights caught something dark against the white snow. A small, motionless form beside Highway 26. Ezra pulled over, his paramedic instincts from decades of emergency calls kicking in before his rational mind could protest. What he found nearly broke his heart. A tiny black puppy, maybe 8 weeks old, unconscious and barely breathing. No collar, no identification, just matted fur and ribs showing through thin skin. "Easy there, little one," he'd whispered, wrapping the puppy in his emergency blanket. The nearest animal hospital was 40 miles away through treacherous mountain roads, but Ezra drove through that blizzard like his own grandchild's life depended on it. Dr. Grace Miller, the town's only veterinarian, met them at her clinic at midnight. The bills from that first week totaled $2,847, every penny of Ezra's emergency savings, and then some. But when those amber eyes first opened and looked at him with pure trust, Ezra knew he'd found his purpose again. "What should we call her?" Grace had asked, watching the puppy's tail wag weakly. "Luna," Ezra replied, without hesitation. "Sarah always said the moon watches over lost souls." Luna grew faster than any dog Ezra had ever seen. Within 6 months, she'd reached 60 pounds. By her first birthday, she topped 90. Now, at 3 years old, she was a magnificent 127-pound creature with coal-black fur and intelligence that sometimes made Ezra's skin crawl. She never barked, only howled at the full moon. She refused commercial dog food, preferring raw meat from the local butcher. Most unsettling of all, she seemed to understand English better than some people. But Luna had also saved 3 children in Cedar Ridge. She'd pulled 8-year-old Tommy Brennan from the swift current of Bear Creek when he'd fallen through ice. She'd led the Morrison family to safety when they'd gotten lost hiking during a sudden fog. She'd awakened the Henderson family at 3 in the morning when their house caught fire. The town loved Luna, even as they whispered about her size and strange habits. Ezra loved her more than life itself. She was the reason he got up each morning, the companion who'd filled the crushing loneliness that had nearly killed him after Sarah's death. Until yesterday, when the anonymous tip reached federal wildlife authorities. Man in Cedar Ridge harboring dangerous wolf. The call from Dr. Grace Miller came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that would change everything. Ezra was feeding Luna her breakfast, 2 pounds of raw venison from Murphy's butcher shop, when his old rotary phone rang with an urgency that made his stomach clench. "Ezra, you need to sit down." Grace's voice carried a tremor he'd never heard before in 15 years of knowing her. The DNA results came back from the federal lab. Luna looked up from her food, those intelligent amber eyes reading the tension in Ezra's face with uncanny accuracy. She moved closer, pressing her massive frame against his legs in the way she always did when she sensed his distress. "Just tell me, Grace, is she part wolf?" The silence stretched so long, Ezra thought the line had gone dead. When Grace finally spoke, her words hit him like a physical blow. "Ezra, Luna isn't part wolf. She's 98% pure wolf. Canis lupus of an extremely rare subspecies. The lab ran the test 3 times to be certain." The phone slipped from Ezra's trembling fingers, clattering to the kitchen floor. Luna whined softly, nudging his hand with her massive head. In 3 years, she'd never shown him anything but gentle affection. She brought him his slippers each morning. She slept beside his bed, her breathing the only sound that helped him sleep through the nightmares of Sarah's final days. She was his family. "There's more," Grace continued when Ezra picked up the phone. "A specimen like Luna could be worth $500,000 to wildlife preserves or research facilities. And Ezra, federal law requires immediate seizure and euthanization of any unregistered wolf in civilian custody." Before Ezra could respond, the sound of vehicles crunching up his gravel driveway made Luna's ears snap to attention. Through the kitchen window, he watched 3 black SUVs surround his property with military precision. Men in tactical gear emerged, their movements coordinated and purposeful. "They're here," Ezra whispered into the phone. The pounding on his front door echoed through the cabin like gunshots. "Federal Wildlife Service! Open the door immediately!" Luna positioned herself between Ezra and the door, her body language shifting into something he'd never seen before. Predatory alertness that made his blood run cold. For the first time in 3 years, Ezra saw not his gentle companion, but the apex predator she truly was. The news hit Cedar Ridge like a wildfire. By noon, the story had spread from Murphy's butcher shop to the Cedar Ridge Gazette's emergency online edition. "Local man's dog revealed as dangerous wolf." The headline accompanied a grainy photo of Luna being loaded into a reinforced transport cage, her eyes wild with confusion and terror. The town split down the middle within hours. Outside Ezra's house, 2 distinct groups formed with the bitter division of a community at war with itself. The Save Luna faction rallied around the elderly residents who remembered every act of kindness Luna had shown. Martha Henderson, whose family Luna had saved from the house fire, held a sign reading, "Heroes don't have to be human." The parents of children Luna had rescued stood shoulder to shoulder with retired teachers and longtime residents who'd watched Luna grow from a tiny puppy into the town's unofficial guardian. But newer residents, young families who'd moved to Cedar Ridge for its safe, small-town atmosphere, formed an equally passionate opposition. "What if it had been my child?" demanded Jennifer Walsh, clutching her toddler. "Wolves are predators. They kill livestock, they attack people. This isn't some Disney movie." The online petition to save Luna reached 50,000 signatures within 6 hours, with comments pouring in from across the country. Wildlife experts debated on social media, Animal rights activists planned protests. The story went viral with hashtags like #SaveLuna and #WolvesAreNotPets trending on every platform. But in the sterile holding facility 30 miles away, Luna refused to eat. She lay in the corner of her concrete cell, her massive frame pressed against the wall closest to Cedar Ridge, as if she could somehow sense the direction home. The wildlife officers reported that she only lifted her head when Ezra's voice played on the radio during his tearful interview with the local news station. "She's not just my pet," Ezra had said, his weathered face streaked with tears. "She's my family. She's the reason I'm still alive. When Sarah died, I was ready to follow her. Luna gave me something to live for again." The federal prosecutor assigned to the case, David Morrison, watched the interview from his office in Portland. He'd handled dozens of illegal wildlife cases, but something about the old man's raw grief made him uncomfortable. Still, the law was clear. Wolves were dangerous predators that belonged in the wild or specialized facilities, not in suburban homes with elderly owners who couldn't control them if their predatory instincts emerged. Luna had 72 hours before federal regulations required her euthanization. The countdown had begun. The stranger arrived in Cedar Ridge on a gray Thursday morning, driving a silver rental car with California plates and wearing the kind of expensive outdoor gear that screamed city folk trying to look outdoorsy. He parked outside Murphy's butcher shop and asked 3 different people for directions to the Wolfman's house, before someone finally pointed him toward Ezra's cabin. Dr. Jonathan Winters stepped out of his car with the calculated confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. At 52, he carried himself with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades in academia, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the mountain wind. But his eyes held something darker, a haunted quality that suggested sleepless nights and old wounds that had never properly healed. Ezra was sitting on his porch, staring at the empty spot where Luna's food bowl used to sit, when the stranger approached. 3 days without Luna had aged him years. His hands shook when he tried to drink his morning coffee, and he'd taken to leaving the radio on constantly just to fill the crushing silence that reminded him too much of the months after Sarah's death. "Mr. Mitchell, my name is Dr. Jonathan Winters. I believe we need to talk about Luna." Something in the man's tone made Ezra's grief sharpen into suspicion. "You're the one who called them, aren't you? You're the anonymous tip." Winters had the grace to look uncomfortable, but he didn't deny it. "May I sit down? What I have to tell you is complicated." "Complicated?" Ezra's voice cracked with 3 days of suppressed rage. "My family is sitting in a concrete cage waiting to die because someone decided to play God with her life. What's complicated about that?" But Winters was already reaching into his briefcase, pulling out a folder thick with documents and photographs. The top photo made Ezra's breath catch. It showed a magnificent black wolf, nearly identical to Luna, standing in what looked like a backyard somewhere warmer than Oregon. "This was Phantom," Winters said quietly. "My son Tommy's wolf." The story that emerged over the next hour shattered everything Ezra thought he knew about Luna's origins. Tommy Winters had been 12 years old when he died of a rare genetic disorder called Batten disease, a cruel condition that slowly robbed children of their vision, speech, and motor skills before claiming their lives. In his final months, as his body betrayed him, Tommy's only wish had been to see a real wolf. "The doctor said he had maybe 6 months," Winters explained, his professional composure cracking. "Tommy was obsessed with wolves. He'd read every book, watched every documentary. When he asked if we could adopt one, my wife thought I'd lost my mind. But I had money, connections in the wildlife community. I thought I could give my dying son one perfect thing." Phantom had cost Winters nearly $200,000 in fees, permits, and bribes to wildlife officials. The wolf had lived in their California backyard for 2 years, gentle as a dog and devoted to the wheelchair-bound boy who fed him and read to him every afternoon. When Tommy finally lost his battle with the disease, Phantom seemed to understand. The wolf had laid beside the boy's grave for 3 days before finally allowing Winters to lead him away. Phantom lived for 5 more years after Tommy died, Winters continued. My wife left me. She said I was obsessing over a dead boy's pet instead of grieving properly. Maybe she was right. But Phantom was all I had left of my son. When Phantom died, Winters discovered that the wolf had mated with a domestic dog from a neighboring ranch. 3 puppies had been born, but only one survived, a small female with Phantom's distinctive black coat and intelligent amber eyes. I tried to raise her, but I wasn't in a good place. Drinking too much, not sleeping. The puppy needed someone who could love her properly. So I did research. Found someone with a reputation for rescuing animals. Winters met Ezra's eyes. I drove 800 miles to leave her where you'd find her, Mr. Mitchell. I watched from the woods to make sure you stopped. The revelation hit Ezra like a physical blow. You planned this? You watched me for 3 years? I check on her every few months. Security cameras on the highway, social media posts from the town. I needed to know she was safe, that she was happy. Winters pulled out his phone, showing Ezra dozens of photos. Luna playing with children in the town square. Luna walking beside Ezra on forest trails. Luna sleeping on the porch in the afternoon sun. She was everything I hoped she'd be. Tommy would have loved seeing her so content. Then why? Ezra's voice broke completely. Why call the authorities? Why destroy her life? For the first time, Winters looked genuinely ashamed. Because I'm selfish. Because I'm lonely. Because every day I see her happy with you is another day I remember that I failed her when she needed me. He paused, gathering himself. I thought if she was classified as a dangerous wolf, they'd transfer her to a wildlife facility. I have connections. I could have arranged for her to come to a sanctuary I support. I could see her again, be part of her life. You were going to steal her. I was going to save her, Winters corrected. But I was also going to destroy the only family she's ever known. I realize that now. The 2 men sat in silence as the weight of this confession settled between them. Somewhere 30 miles away, Luna waited in her concrete cell, unaware that the man who'd given her life was the same one who might cost her everything. The transformation of Cedar Ridge from sleepy mountain town to media circus happened overnight. By Friday morning, news vans lined Main Street like metal vultures, their satellite dishes pointed skyward as reporters prepared for live broadcasts about the wolf that fooled an entire community. The Cedar Ridge Inn, which hadn't seen full occupancy since the fishing season 2 years ago, suddenly had a waiting list as journalists, wildlife experts, and curious tourists descended on the town of 21100. Ezra found himself trapped in his own home, unable to step outside without cameras thrust in his face and microphones shoved under his nose. The questions came like artillery fire. Did you know Luna was dangerous? How does it feel to learn you've been living with a predator? Are you concerned about liability if Luna had attacked someone? Inside the cabin, Ezra's landline rang every 30 seconds with calls from television producers, book agents, and wildlife sanctuaries offering to rehome Luna in a more appropriate environment. He'd stopped answering after the 15th call from someone wanting to buy the rights to his story. The only call that mattered came from his son, Jake, on Friday afternoon. Ezra hadn't heard from him in 3 months, but now Jake's voice carried the sharp edge of panic that comes with seeing your parent on national news. Dad, what the hell is going on? I'm watching CNN and they're talking about you living with some kind of wolf. Mom is spinning in her grave. Don't you bring your mother into this, Ezra snapped, his grief finally finding a target. Sarah loved that dog as much as I do. Dad, it's not a dog, it's a wolf. Do you understand what that means? You're 78 years old. I'm 68, Jake. If you called more often, you'd know that. The silence on the other end spoke volumes about their fractured relationship. When Jake finally spoke again, his voice had shifted from panic to something colder, more calculated. Dad, I've been talking to Dr. Henderson about your situation. The forgetfulness, the confusion about dates. Maybe it's time we discussed some options. Ezra's blood ran cold. Dr. Henderson had mentioned early signs of memory loss during his last checkup, but it was mild. Misplaced keys, forgotten appointments, nothing that interfered with his daily life. The idea that Jake might use this crisis to question his competency sent ice through his veins. I'm flying out tomorrow, Jake continued. We need to talk about your living situation. This wolf thing has shown me that you're not thinking clearly. Maybe it's time to consider assisted living, somewhere with proper medical support. The line went dead, leaving Ezra staring at the phone in his empty cabin. The walls seemed to close in around him as he realized he might lose not just Luna, but his independence as well. Jake had never forgiven him for the years spent fighting fires instead of attending soccer games and school plays. Now his son saw an opportunity to finally have the upper hand in their relationship. Meanwhile, the community battle intensified with each passing hour. The Save Luna supporters had organized with military efficiency, led by Martha Henderson, whose house fire Luna had detected. They'd established a command center in the Cedar Ridge Community Hall, complete with phone banks to contact federal representatives and a social media team that kept the hashtag #SaveLuna trending nationally. Rebecca Miller, Dr. Grace's 16-year-old daughter had become the unofficial face of the youth movement. Her TikTok video about Luna saving her from drowning in Bear Creek had been viewed over 2 million times. People think wolves are monsters because of fairy tales, she said in the video, her young voice carrying more authority than most adults. But Luna is the reason I'm alive today. She didn't see prey when I was drowning. She saw family. The opposition had organized too, led by Jennifer Walsh and other newer residents who'd moved to Cedar Ridge seeking small-town safety. They'd contacted their own wildlife experts, including Dr. Marcus Reed from Oregon State University, who provided sobering statistics about wolf attacks and the impossibility of truly domesticating apex predators. Wolves are not dogs, Dr. Reed explained during a town hall meeting that had drawn over 400 people. They may appear docile for years, but they retain predatory instincts that can emerge without warning. A 127-pound wolf can generate enough bite force to crush human bones. This isn't about emotion, it's about public safety. The meeting erupted into shouting matches as neighbors who'd known each other for decades suddenly found themselves on opposite sides of an issue that seemed to symbolize deeper divisions about change, tradition, and what kind of community Cedar Ridge wanted to be. Dr. Grace Miller found herself caught in the middle of the controversy, her professional opinion sought by both sides. As Luna's veterinarian, she'd monitored the wolf's health and behavior for 3 years. Her clinical assessment showed no signs of aggression, excellent socialization with humans, and stress indicators only when separated from Ezra. But Grace also understood the legal and ethical complexities of the situation. Late Friday night, alone in her clinic, she reviewed Luna's files with the thoroughness of someone whose testimony could determine life or death. The wolf's medical history read like that of any large domestic dog: vaccinations, routine checkups, treatment for minor injuries, but there were anomalies that in hindsight suggested her true nature, unusual dietary preferences, hyperacute hearing and scent detection, and a bone density that exceeded normal canine parameters. The most troubling discovery came when Grace reviewed the security footage from her clinic's parking lot. For months, she'd noticed the same silver car appearing periodically, always when Ezra brought Luna for appointments. The driver never got out, just watched from a distance. Now she recognized Dr. Jonathan Winters, and the implications made her stomach turn. Grace picked up her phone and dialed the Federal Wildlife Office. Agent Patricia Coleman answered on the second ring, her voice betraying the exhaustion of someone dealing with a case that had spiraled far beyond normal protocols. Agent Coleman, this is Dr. Grace Miller. I need to report new information about the Luna case. Dr. Miller, unless this is directly relevant to the animal's custody hearing, I need to ask you to... Dr. Winters has been stalking my client and his animal for months. I have video evidence. This wasn't an anonymous tip about public safety. This was a stalking situation that escalated to false reporting. The revelation added another layer of complexity to an already unprecedented case. If Winters had manipulated the federal system for personal reasons rather than legitimate safety concerns, it could change everything. But with Luna's hearing scheduled for Monday morning and federal law requiring swift action on illegal wildlife possession, time was running out. Saturday brought Jake Mitchell to Cedar Ridge, along with a stern-faced woman he introduced as Patricia Newman, an elder care specialist from Sacramento. Their arrival at Ezra's cabin coincided with Dr. Winters' third attempt to speak privately with the old man, creating a confrontation that would have been comedic if the stakes weren't so high. "Dad, who is this man? Why is he here?" Jake demanded, his protective instincts finally emerging after years of neglect. "I'm Dr. Jonathan Winters. I'm trying to help your father understand his legal options regarding Luna." Patricia Newman stepped forward with the professional coldness of someone who specialized in difficult family transitions. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to assess your cognitive function and living situation. Your son is concerned about your ability to make sound decisions." The irony wasn't lost on Ezra. While he faced losing Luna due to questions about her true nature, his son was questioning his own competency. Both challenges struck at the heart of identity and belonging, forcing him to fight for the right to love and be loved by those society deemed inappropriate or dangerous. As Saturday evening fell over Cedar Ridge, 3 separate battles raged: the legal fight for Luna's life, the family struggle for Ezra's independence, and the community war over what kind of place they wanted to call home. The countdown to Monday's hearing continued, with federal law requiring a decision that could satisfy no one and devastate everyone who'd been touched by the unlikely bond between a lonely old man and the wolf who'd saved his life. The federal courthouse in Portland had never seen anything like the crowd that gathered on Monday morning. By 6 a.m., 3 hours before the hearing, protesters lined the steps with signs reading, "Wolves are wildlife, not pets," and "Luna saved my child." News crews jockeyed for position as federal marshals established security perimeters around the building. The case had drawn attention from animal rights activists, indigenous rights groups who considered wolves sacred, and concerned citizens from across the Pacific Northwest. Inside the courthouse, Judge Margaret Thompson reviewed the case file with growing unease. In 35 years on the federal bench, she'd presided over drug cartels, terrorism cases, and environmental crimes. But never had she faced a decision where the law seemed so clear and the moral implications so muddled. Federal statute was unambiguous. Unregistered wolves in civilian custody must be euthanized. But the public outcry and unprecedented circumstances had drawn scrutiny from the Department of Justice, environmental groups, and even the governor's office. Ezra sat in the front row, looking smaller and more fragile than his 68 years, The past week had aged him visibly. His hands trembled when he tried to drink water, and Jake noticed his father had called him Tommy twice during their argument the night before, confusing him with Dr. Winter's deceased son. The stress of possibly losing Luna was accelerating the early signs of memory loss that Jake had observed during his visit. Jake Mitchell sat beside his father, torn between protective instincts and practical concerns. The elder care specialist, Patricia Newman, had prepared a detailed report questioning Ezra's capacity to care for a dangerous animal, citing his isolated living situation, limited income, and emerging cognitive issues. But watching his father's obvious anguish, Jake began to understand what Luna meant to the old man. She wasn't just a pet, she was the reason he got up each morning. Dr. Grace Miller took the witness stand first, her testimony carrying the weight of 3 years of professional observation. Under direct examination from the federal prosecutor, she confirmed Luna's species classification and acknowledged the potential dangers of keeping a wolf in a residential setting. Dr. Miller, in your professional opinion, does Luna pose a threat to public safety? Asked Assistant U.S. Attorney David Morrison. Grace chose her words carefully. Any large predator has the potential to cause harm. Luna weighs 127 pounds and possesses the natural capabilities of her species. However, in 3 years of veterinary care, I have observed no aggressive behaviors, no dominance displays, and no predatory responses toward humans. But could those behaviors emerge without warning? Theoretically, yes. But I would note that the same could be said for many large domestic dogs. Luna has demonstrated remarkable socialization and emotional regulation that exceeds what I've seen in many traditional pets. The prosecutor pressed harder. Dr. Miller, are you testifying that a wolf can be fully domesticated? No, sir. I'm testifying that this particular wolf has formed a profound interspecies bond that appears to override typical predatory instincts. But I cannot guarantee future behavior any more than I could guarantee the future behavior of any animal, or, for that matter, any human. The defense attorney, Harold Kensington, whom Ezra had hired with money borrowed against his house, focused on Luna's rescue history during cross-examination. He presented video testimony from the 3 families whose children Luna had saved, each parent tearfully recounting how the wolf had risked her own safety to protect their kids. Your Honor, Kensington argued, we're not dealing with a wild predator that wandered into civilization. We're dealing with an animal that has actively chosen to protect this community for 3 years. The prosecution wants us to fear what Luna might do, but the evidence shows us what she has done. She's saved lives. Dr. Jonathan Winters took the stand as a prosecution witness, his testimony designed to establish Luna's wild heritage and unsuitability for domestic life. But under cross-examination, his true motivations began to emerge. Dr. Winters, you stated that you reported Luna's presence out of concern for public safety. Is that the only reason? Kensington asked. Winters hesitated, his composed facade cracking. Yes, public safety was my primary concern. Dr. Winters, isn't it true that you placed Luna with Mr. Mitchell as a puppy and have been monitoring her for 3 years? The courtroom erupted in whispers as Winters' face went pale. That's not... Your Honor, I present security footage from Dr. Miller's veterinary clinic showing Dr. Winters' vehicle surveilling Luna during multiple appointments. This wasn't an anonymous public safety tip. This was a stalking situation that escalated to false reporting. Judge Thompson called for order as the revelation sent shockwaves through the gallery. The prosecution's case began to crumble as Winters was forced to admit his personal connection to Luna and his original plan to reclaim her through legal manipulation. But the most devastating testimony came from an unexpected source. Rebecca Miller, Dr. Grace's 16-year-old daughter, had been granted permission to testify about her rescue by Luna. Her account of nearly drowning in Bear Creek and Luna's response painted a picture of an animal that understood human vulnerability and chose protection over predation. Luna didn't hesitate, Rebecca testified, her young voice steady despite the packed courtroom. She saw me go under and immediately jumped in. The current was strong enough to knock down a grown man, but she fought against it to reach me. When she pulled me to shore, she was gentle. No teeth marks, no scratching. She placed me on the bank and then stayed beside me until help arrived. Rebecca, were you afraid of Luna during the rescue? Kensington asked. No, sir. I was afraid of drowning. Luna made me feel safe. The emotional impact of her testimony was evident as several jurors wiped their eyes, but Judge Thompson maintained her professional demeanor. The law was clear regardless of emotional appeals. The prosecution's rebuttal featured Dr. Marcus Reed from Oregon State University, who presented sobering statistics about wolf attacks and the impossibility of predicting when predatory instincts might emerge. His testimony was clinical, professional, and deeply unsettling. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot base legal decisions on anecdotal evidence or emotional attachments, Dr. Reed testified. Wolves are apex predators with bite forces exceeding 1,500 pounds per square inch. They are hardwired by millions of years of evolution to hunt, kill, and consume prey. No amount of socialization can permanently override those instincts. Dr. Reed, in your expert opinion, what is the appropriate course of action regarding Luna? Immediate euthanization, followed by necropsy to study her brain structure and hormone levels. Her case could provide valuable data about wolf cognition and domestication attempts, but she poses an unacceptable risk to public safety. The casual mention of Luna's death as a research opportunity sent a visible shudder through Ezra, who had been growing more agitated as the hearing progressed. Jake placed a protective hand on his father's shoulder, finally understanding the depth of their bond. As the testimony concluded, Judge Thompson faced an impossible decision. Federal law required Luna's euthanization, but the circumstances suggested that the law might be inadequate for cases involving animals that existed in the gray area between wild and domestic. The precedent she set could affect similar cases across the country. This court will recess for deliberation, Judge Thompson announced. All parties will return at 2 p.m. for my decision. During the lunch break, an unexpected development occurred outside the courthouse. Dr. Winters approached Ezra with visible emotional distress, his professional composure completely shattered. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to tell you something," Winters said, his voice barely audible above the crowd noise. "I've been watching Luna for 3 years, and I've seen how she's changed you. My son, Tommy, he would have hated what I've done. He loved wolves because he believed they were misunderstood, not because he thought they were dangerous." Winters paused, gathering himself. Tommy died believing that love could tame any wild thing. Luna proved him right, and I've spent 3 years trying to destroy that proof because I was jealous of your happiness. The admission hung between them as protesters chanted around the courthouse steps. Ezra looked at the man who had given him Luna and then tried to take her away, seeing not an enemy, but another broken soul seeking connection to something lost. "What are you going to do?" Ezra asked quietly. "I'm going to tell the judge the truth about everything. Tommy's story, Luna's parentage, my manipulation of the federal system. Maybe it won't save her, but you deserve to know who she really is before—" He couldn't finish the sentence. As they prepared to return to the courtroom for Judge Thompson's decision, Ezra felt the weight of every possibility. Luna's death, his own failing memory, Jake's plans for assisted living, and the destruction of the only family he had left. The next hour would determine whether love could triumph over law, whether mercy could override precedent, and whether an old man and his wolf would have the chance to grow old together in the mountains of Oregon. The courthouse bells chimed 2 o'clock as Judge Thompson returned to her bench, Luna's fate sealed in the envelope she carried. Judge Margaret Thompson's voice carried across the hushed courtroom with the weight of 35 years of difficult decisions. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence presented, this court finds that Luna, classified as Canis lupus, is indeed an unregistered wolf in civilian custody, in direct violation of federal wildlife protection statutes. Ezra's heart stopped. The words echoed in his mind like the doctor's voice 4 years ago when they'd told him Sarah's cancer had metastasized. Jake's hand tightened on his shoulder, but the touch felt distant, meaningless against the crushing reality of what was coming. Federal law is unambiguous in such cases. The animal poses an inherent threat to public safety regardless of past behavior or emotional attachments formed by well-meaning citizens. Judge Thompson's voice wavered almost imperceptibly, but her legal training kept her steady. Therefore, Luna must be transferred immediately to federal wildlife custody for euthanization within 72 hours. The courtroom erupted. Rebecca Miller's scream of "No!" pierced through the chaos as protesters in the gallery began chanting, "Save Luna!" Federal marshals moved quickly to restore order, but the emotional explosion couldn't be contained. Martha Henderson collapsed into her husband's arms, sobbing for the wolf who had saved her home. Dr. Grace Miller sat frozen, her medical training warring with her maternal instincts as she watched a death sentence delivered with bureaucratic precision. Ezra didn't hear the chaos around him. The world had gone silent except for the sound of his own labored breathing. This was how it felt when Sarah died. The moment when hope transforms into a physical pain that radiates through your chest until you can't distinguish between emotional and physical agony. His hands shook as he tried to stand, Jake supporting his sudden weakness. "Dad, we'll appeal. We'll fight this," Jake whispered, but his voice carried no conviction. Federal wildlife law allowed no appeals for public safety cases. Luna would be dead by Thursday morning. Outside the courthouse, the news crews captured every moment of Ezra's breakdown. The footage of a 78-year-old man, though he was only 68, his grief aging him beyond his years, collapsing on the courthouse steps would play on every major network for the next week. But in that moment, Ezra was aware only of the crushing weight of failure. "I couldn't save Sarah," he whispered to Jake through his tears. "I couldn't save my own wife, and now I can't save Luna. What kind of man fails everyone he loves?" The drive back to Cedar Ridge felt like a funeral procession. Word of the verdict had reached the town before Ezra arrived, and Main Street was lined with residents holding candles in broad daylight, a premature vigil for a wolf who wasn't dead yet, but soon would be. Children who had played with Luna held pictures they'd drawn of her. Adults who had opposed her presence stood awkwardly aside, their victory feeling hollow in the face of such communal grief. At the federal holding facility, Luna seemed to sense the change before anyone told her. She had stopped eating entirely after the first day of confinement, but now her behavior shifted into something that broke the hearts of even the hardened wildlife officers. She lay in the corner of her concrete cell, facing the direction of Cedar Ridge, making soft whining sounds that carried an almost human quality of mourning. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the facility's veterinarian, had overseen hundreds of wildlife euthanizations in her career, but Luna's case haunted her. "She knows, Doctor," Walsh told her supervisor. "I've never seen an animal display this level of grief awareness. She's not just stressed, she's mourning." "The law doesn't recognize animal emotions," her supervisor replied curtly. "We follow protocol, not feelings." That evening, federal regulations allowed Ezra one final visit. The transport to the facility felt like his own journey to execution. Jake drove in silence, both men lost in their private grief. The holding facility was a sterile concrete building that smelled of disinfectant and animal fear, the opposite of everything Luna had known for 3 years. When Ezra entered the visitation area, separated from Luna by reinforced glass, the wolf's transformation was devastating. The magnificent creature who had bounded through Oregon forest with joy and confidence was reduced to a shadow of herself. Her coat had lost its luster, her eyes were dull with depression, and her powerful frame seemed to have shrunk with despair. But when she saw Ezra, Luna pressed herself against the glass with desperate intensity. Her whines became more urgent, more human-like, as if she were trying to communicate something vital. Ezra placed his hand against the glass, matching her paw print on the other side, and broke down completely. "I'm sorry, girl. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you," he sobbed. "You saved my life, and I couldn't save yours." The visitation lasted 30 minutes, federal protocol for final visits. As guards prepared to escort Ezra away, Luna began howling with a sound that carried such raw anguish that several officers left the room. It was the first time in 3 years that Luna had howled, and the sound seemed to embody every unfulfilled promise, every broken bond, every loss that both she and Ezra had endured. That night, Ezra sat in his empty cabin surrounded by Luna's belongings, her favorite rope toy, the old blanket she slept on, the food bowls he couldn't bring himself to put away. Jake stayed with him, finally understanding the depth of connection his father had found with the wolf. They didn't speak much, but Jake began to grasp why his father had been willing to risk everything for Luna's sake. At midnight, Ezra's phone rang. Dr. Grace Miller's voice was thick with tears. "Ezra, there's something you need to know. Dr. Winters has been calling media outlets all evening. He's going public with Luna's full story, how he placed her with you, why he reported her, everything. He says he can't live with Tommy's memory being tainted by what he's done." The revelation offered no comfort. Even if Dr. Winters' confession generated public sympathy, federal law remained unchanged. Luna would die Thursday morning at 10 a.m., and all the confessions and media attention in the world couldn't alter that reality. As Ezra hung up the phone, he realized he was facing not just Luna's death, but the complete dissolution of the family he'd built from grief and love. Tomorrow would bring reporters, lawyers, and bureaucrats, but none of them could restore what was being taken away. In 48 hours, Luna would be gone, and Ezra would return to the crushing loneliness that had nearly killed him before a small black puppy changed everything. At 3:47 a.m. on Wednesday morning, exactly 43 hours before Luna's scheduled euthanization, Emily Chen's phone buzzed with a text message that would change everything. The investigative journalist had been following the Luna case for her environmental blog, but what appeared on her screen made her sit bolt upright in her Portland hotel room. "Check your email. Lab results you need to see. Anonymous." The attachment contained laboratory documents from Pacific Northwest Genetics, the same lab that had conducted Luna's original DNA analysis. But these weren't the results that had been presented in court. Emily's hands trembled as she read the technical jargon, cross-referencing terms she didn't understand until the truth became devastatingly clear. The original DNA sample had been contaminated. According to the internal lab notes dated 3 days after the initial test, a technician had discovered that Luna's blood sample had been mixed with tissue from a pure wolf specimen stored in an adjacent freezer. The contamination had skewed the results, making Luna appear to be 98% pure wolf when she was actually 65% wolf and 35% domestic dog, a hybrid that fell under completely different federal regulations. Emily's phone rang immediately. Dr. Grace Miller's voice was thick with exhaustion and barely contained fury. "Emily, I sent you those documents. I've been going through Luna's files all night and something didn't add up. I requested the raw lab data under veterinary privilege, and when I saw what they really found... Grace, this changes everything. Hybrids aren't subject to the same euthanization requirements. It gets worse. I called the lab to confirm, and the technician who discovered the contamination, Marcus Reed, Dr. Marcus Reed from Oregon State, the same expert who testified against Luna. He knew the results were wrong and never reported it. The implications crashed over Emily like a cold wave. Dr. Reed, who had provided such compelling testimony about Luna's danger to public safety, had deliberately concealed evidence that would have saved her life. His motivation wasn't scientific objectivity, it was something far more personal and disturbing. Emily spent the next 4 hours making phone calls that pulled her deeper into a web of academic politics and personal vendettas. Dr. Reed's colleagues at Oregon State revealed that he'd been passed over for department chair 3 times, his research funding had been cut, and his wife had left him the previous year. More disturbing were the whispered allegations about his research methods, corners cut, data manipulated, and a growing reputation for putting personal agenda ahead of scientific integrity. By sunrise, Emily had pieced together Dr. Reed's true motivation. He saw the Luna case as an opportunity to rebuild his flagging career, positioning himself as the voice of reason against dangerous anthropomorphization of wild animals. Media appearances, consulting fees, and potential book deals awaited the expert who saved Oregon from the wolf threat. Luna's death would launch his rehabilitation in the scientific community. Meanwhile, at the federal holding facility, Dr. Jennifer Walsh was conducting Luna's pre-euthanization health assessment when she noticed something that made her stomach lurch. The wolf's behavior had changed overnight. Instead of the depressed lethargy she'd shown for days, Luna was exhibiting signs of intense physical distress. "Get me an ultrasound machine," Dr. Walsh told her assistant. "Something's not right." The ultrasound revealed what would complicate an already unprecedented case beyond all legal precedent. Luna was pregnant. 4 distinct heartbeats showed on the grainy monitor, indicating a litter due within 3 weeks. Federal protocol was clear. Pregnant wolves in custody must carry to term before euthanization to prevent unnecessary suffering to the unborn animals. But the discovery raised new questions that made Dr. Walsh's head spin. If Luna was pregnant, when had mating occurred? The facility's logs showed no interaction with male wolves, and Luna had been in Ezra's custody for 3 years. The only possibility was that she had mated with a wild wolf during her time in Cedar Ridge. Evidence of natural behavior that the defense could argue proved her wild instincts were intact. Dr. Walsh faced an ethical crisis that her veterinary training hadn't prepared her for. Reporting Luna's pregnancy would delay her euthanization by at least a month, giving lawyers time to file appeals and media attention to intensify. But it would also mean that 4 additional wolves would eventually face the same fate unless the legal situation changed dramatically. At 11 a.m., Emily Chen's rental car screeched into the parking lot of the federal courthouse in Portland. She had 30 minutes before the administrative hearing to finalize Luna's euthanization schedule, and the corrected DNA results in her briefcase represented Luna's only hope for survival. Judge Margaret Thompson had agreed to the emergency hearing with obvious reluctance. Federal wildlife cases rarely generated the media attention or public outcry that surrounded Luna's situation, and the judge was acutely aware that her decision would be scrutinized by legal scholars, animal rights activists, and political observers across the country. "Your Honor," Emily announced as she burst through the courtroom doors, "I have evidence that the DNA results presented in Luna's original hearing were falsified." The revelation sent Assistant U.S. Attorney David Morrison into damage control mode. "Your Honor, Miss Chen is not a party to this case and has no standing to present evidence. I'm requesting emergency intervention based on new evidence of prosecutorial misconduct, Emily countered, her journalist instincts taking over. Dr. Marcus Reed deliberately concealed DNA contamination that would have changed Luna's legal classification. Judge Thompson called for a 30-minute recess to review the laboratory documents Emily presented. During that half hour, the corrected DNA results traveled through a chain of verification that would expose one of the most significant cases of expert witness fraud in federal wildlife prosecution history. When court reconvened, Dr. Reed was conspicuously absent. Phone calls to his office at Oregon State revealed that he had taken emergency medical leave and was unavailable for comment. His disappearance only strengthened the evidence that his testimony had been deliberately misleading. But even as the DNA revelation offered hope, Dr. Walsh's pregnancy discovery introduced new complications. Federal attorneys argued that Luna's mating with wild wolves proved she remained dangerously wild and posed an even greater threat to public safety. Environmental groups countered that her successful reproduction was evidence of healthy ecosystem integration that should be protected, not destroyed. Judge Thompson found herself facing a legal puzzle unlike anything in federal jurisprudence. Was Luna a dangerous wolf requiring immediate euthanization, a protected hybrid deserving different legal treatment, or a pregnant animal whose status demanded delay until her offspring could be properly evaluated? As afternoon shadows lengthened across the courthouse, 3 separate legal teams prepared arguments that would determine not just Luna's fate, but the future of human wildlife law in America. The wolf who had begun life as an abandoned puppy in a snowstorm now sat at the center of a legal precedent that could reshape how society balanced individual animal welfare against public safety concerns. Luna's pregnancy had bought her time, but it had also raised the stakes immeasurably. Instead of 1 life hanging in the balance, 5 now awaited Judge Thompson's decision about where law ended and mercy began. Judge Margaret Thompson returned to her chambers at 4:30 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon, carrying the weight of a decision that would define not just Luna's fate, but her own legacy after 35 years on the federal bench. The corrected DNA results lay spread across her mahogany desk alongside federal wildlife statutes, legal precedents, and a photograph of Luna that Rebecca Miller had submitted as evidence. The wolf gently nuzzling a toddler at a Cedar Ridge community picnic. Outside her window, the protest had grown to over 800 people. News helicopters circled overhead, and she could see satellite trucks from major networks lined up for blocks. Her clerk had informed her that the governor of Oregon had called twice, along with senators from 3 states and the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Everyone wanted to influence a decision that legally belonged to her alone. At 5:15 p.m., Judge Thompson's phone rang with a call that would reshape everything she thought she understood about the case. Dr. Jonathan Winters was calling from his hotel room, and his voice carried the broken quality of a man who had finally reached his breaking point. "Your Honor, I need to make a formal statement about Luna's case. I've been living with lies for 3 years, and I can't let that wolf die for my sins." What Winters revealed in the next 20 minutes dismantled every assumption about Luna's origins and legal status. He had obtained Luna not through legitimate wildlife channels, but through an underground network that bred wolves illegally for wealthy collectors. Her mother hadn't been a wild wolf. She had been a 3rd-generation captive animal with documented domestic dog ancestry dating back to the 1970s. "I have the breeding records, Your Honor. Luna isn't just a hybrid. Her entire bloodline has been in human custody for over 50 years. She's no more a wild wolf than a poodle is a wild dog." The documentation Winters provided by Emergency Courier painted a picture of systematic deception that went far beyond his personal manipulation of Ezra Mitchell. The illegal breeding operation had supplied exotic pets to celebrities, politicians, and wealthy individuals across the western United States. Luna represented not wild genetics that needed protection, but the product of decades of human interference with wolf bloodlines. Judge Thompson realized she was facing not just a custody case, but a criminal conspiracy that implicated wildlife officials, laboratory technicians, and academic experts. Dr. Reed's falsified testimony was part of a larger pattern of corruption that used federal wildlife laws to eliminate evidence of illegal breeding operations. As this revelation sank in, her clerk announced an emergency call from the federal holding facility. Dr. Jennifer Walsh's voice carried unprecedented urgency as she reported a development that changed everything yet again. Your Honor, Luna has gone into premature labor. The stress of captivity has triggered early delivery, and we have a life-threatening situation. Without immediate veterinary intervention, we'll lose both the mother and all 4 puppies. The medical emergency created a legal paradox that federal statutes had never anticipated. Luna was simultaneously a protected animal requiring life-saving medical care and a condemned prisoner awaiting execution. Her puppies existed in an even stranger legal limbo, not yet born but already sentenced to death under federal wildlife protection laws. Dr. Walsh's next words cut through the legal complexity with heartbreaking simplicity. Your Honor, Luna is calling for Ezra. She's in distress, and the only thing that seems to calm her is hearing his voice on the phone. I've never seen anything like it. She responds to him like a child calling for her father. Judge Thompson made a decision that would be debated in law schools for decades. Transport Luna to Dr. Miller's veterinary clinic in Cedar Ridge immediately. Her medical care takes precedence over custody arrangements. And get Ezra Mitchell there now. The convoy that left the federal facility at 7:30 p.m. looked more like a presidential motorcade than an animal transport. Federal marshals, wildlife officers, veterinary staff, and media vehicles stretched for nearly a mile along Highway 26. Luna traveled in a specially equipped veterinary transport, her labor progressing dangerously fast as stress compounded the complications of premature delivery. At Grace Miller's clinic, Ezra waited with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since Jake's phone call an hour earlier. For 3 days, he had been preparing to say goodbye to Luna forever. Now he faced the possibility of watching her die in childbirth while bringing new life into a world that had already condemned her offspring to death. When Luna was wheeled into the clinic on a veterinary gurney, her transformation was devastating. The powerful, confident wolf who had once bounded through Oregon forests was reduced to a frightened animal in medical crisis. But when she heard Ezra's voice, her response was immediate and profound. "Easy, girl. Daddy's here," Ezra whispered, his weathered hand finding her massive head. Luna's labored breathing slowed, her wild eyes focusing on his face with an intensity that transcended species barriers. Dr. Grace Miller worked with the efficiency of someone whose 20 years of veterinary experience had prepared her for this moment. Luna's first puppy was delivered at 8:47 p.m., a tiny black female who emerged silent and still. Grace's resuscitation efforts stretched for 6 agonizing minutes before the puppy's first breath brought tears to every eye in the room. The second puppy, born at 9:23 p.m., was stronger, a gray male who immediately began nursing with voracious appetite. The third arrival at 10:15 p.m. was another female, brown-black with distinctive white markings that reminded everyone of the domestic dog ancestry Dr. Winters had revealed. But it was the fourth puppy, born at 11:02 p.m., that would change everything. This tiny male emerged with physical characteristics that stunned Dr. Walsh. Shortened muzzle, curved tail, floppy ears. He looked more like a German shepherd puppy than a wolf, clear evidence of the domestic dog genetics that ran through Luna's carefully hidden bloodline. Judge Thompson arrived at the clinic at 11:30 p.m., abandoning judicial protocol to witness the birth that would inform her final decision. What she saw was not a dangerous wild animal, but a devoted mother who looked to Ezra for comfort while protecting her newborns with gentle intensity. At midnight, as Luna nursed her 4 puppies while Ezra sat beside her providing the emotional support that had sustained her through the most difficult night of her life, Judge Thompson reached her verdict. The scene before her, interspecies love that transcended legal definitions, represented everything her 35 years of jurisprudence had taught her about justice. Luna's legal status will be reclassified as a domesticated animal based on her documented breeding history, Judge Thompson announced to the small crowd gathered in the clinic. The charges against Mr. Mitchell are dismissed. Luna and her puppies will remain in his custody under special permit. The cheers that erupted in Cedar Ridge could be heard 3 miles away. Church bells rang, car horns honked, and the celebration that had been postponed for a week finally exploded with joy that reflected the community's relief and vindication. Dr. Winters, watching the coverage from his hotel room, finally found peace with Tommy's memory. His son would have loved seeing Luna surrounded by her babies and the humans who formed her pack. For the first time in 8 years, he didn't feel like he had failed his child's trust. As Thursday morning dawned over the Cascade Mountains, Luna slept peacefully in her favorite spot by Ezra's fireplace, her 4 puppies nursing while their grandfather kept watch over the family that law had tried to destroy, but love had ultimately saved. Dear friends, as we close Luna's incredible journey, I want you to know that this story isn't just about a remarkable wolf. It's about the truth we all carry in our hearts as we navigate these golden years of our lives. Like Ezra Mitchell, many of us have faced the profound loneliness that comes after losing a spouse, after children move away, after retirement leaves us wondering if our best chapters are behind us. But Luna's story reminds us that our greatest purpose might still be waiting to unfold. At 68, Ezra thought his story had ended with Sarah's passing. Instead, he discovered that love multiplies when we open our hearts to unexpected family, whether that's a rescued animal, a neighbor in need, or strangers who become chosen companions. Luna showed us that it's never too late to make a difference, that wisdom earned through life's battles becomes our greatest gift to others, and that sometimes caring for someone else heals our own wounded hearts. Your experience, your kindness, your capacity to love, these aren't diminishing with age. They're deepening into something more precious than gold. What unexpected blessing has entered your life when you thought your story was ending? How has caring for others helped heal your own heart? Please share your stories below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.